more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And at the beginning of every hour, I always want to remind people to go to the website. If you've missed a show, go to the website and tune in and tune up and see what else we've been doing, because we've been doing some really awesome work on Living Your Inspired Life. So with that said, I told my guest before we came on air that I'm just going to goober on him because I'm loving this book that he's written. The book is called Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. I want to welcome Gregg Levoy. Gregg, thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here because, wow, I am so enjoying this book. And of course, there are no mistakes in the world or in life, or particularly my life, because, of course, it came into my hands at the absolute right time when I am reinventing myself personally. And your book is all about finding the passion of living life. So I want to read. So I'm going to read from the very quote right off the top, because it describes what the book is about. You say, Vital Signs is about what inspires passion and what defeats it, how you lose it and how you get it back. And ultimately, it's about the endless yet endlessly fruitful tug of war between passion and security, the wild in you and the tame, your natural self and your conditioned self. And I got to say, Gregg, that seems to be everybody's tug of war is, how can I live my life fully and yet make sure that I've got enough money to pay my bills on time and yada, yada, and a house and the kids and everything. And this book, the work that you've been doing out in the world, it sounds like comes from a deep, connected place within yourself where you found how to live consistently in the moment and with passion.
Oh, I would say so. I would say it's been one of my lifelong fascinations with how people create a life that really belongs to them and isn't a knockoff, and a life that really has some power and some passion to it. And I have to tell you, I had a little revelation myself that probably should not have been a revelation, but it was. A workshop I just did last week. We were talking about something that Larry King, the talk show host Larry King, had said. Somebody asked him, who makes a great guest for your show? And he said, well, they got to be funny, articulate, self-deprecating, and they have to have a chip on their shoulder, which I found fascinating because I'm not generally into encouraging people to nurture their grudges, but I do like to acknowledge, and I like to hear him acknowledge that having a chip on your shoulder is a form of passion. And so we're talking about this in the workshop, and I shared a story about how I spent most of my childhood on Ritalin, and I got a little bit hot under the collar sharing this chip on my shoulder about it. And one of the women in the front row said, it's probably the reason you wrote both of your books. The last one on callings, this one on passion, and it's not like I hadn't somewhat intuited that all along, but somehow her saying it the way she did closed the circle for me in a way, and I realized that that's part of my story of how and why I feel compelled to share this work with the world and to explore it for myself. That's one of my motivations. I have a chip on my shoulder about having my vitalities suppressed.
Yep. That's interesting that you're sharing that, Gregg, because in my childhood, I had a hard time sleeping. And so my mom, God bless them all, at a very young age, she was giving me sleeping pills.
Ooh.
Uh-huh. And, so it's like, wow, the things that our parents think that they're doing the appropriate right things, because I'm a parent and I think those things. But at the same time, there is all sorts of different ways of suppressing, like you said, the vitality of who we are.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's the people around us who can't cope with our natural exuberances and, natural energies. And, my mother wanted a career rather than children. She got 3 boys, 2 of which were twins.
Oh, boy.
And,
boy.
like we were just hanging off the curtains like kitty cats.
Mm-hmm.
And, you've heard of the expression, mother's little helper.
Yeah.
Well, she was giving us the pill instead of taking it herself.
Right.
And it was just, in some senses, a coping mechanism. And part of this is what people are up against in living an inspired life and hanging on to their passions and exuberances, is that it's not always convenient or desirable for the people who have to raise us, have to try to keep order in our classrooms, the corporate setting where they would prefer you leave most of yourself out in the parking lot when you punch in.
Right.
And this is some of what we're up against.
Well, it certainly seems like there is I want to say universal, but maybe not, maybe in the United States, kind of an overall pall, of not even depression, but just, like you're saying, suppression of each and every individual really being fully expressed. And you know what I noticed too, Greg, is that those people that are fully expressed, we think they're the unique ones. Oh, well, they're different from me. Because they get to do all that, and I could never do all that because of whatever the, list is of reasons why not. Right.
And in many cases, I think a lot of those people have simply fought for it.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're all at the effect of many of the downward pulling forces in the culture. I mean, we all have stress. We all have fear. We all lived through a great recession in a code orange world and all that. But some people manage to find ways, maybe out of their own desperation, to hang on to that. I once heard Red Fox. Remember Red Fox?
Yep.
Sanford and Son. He said, heroes are not born. They're cornered.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes we are forced by our own suffering and desperation to do the courageous thing.
Well, there was something in your book, you were talking about the hero's journey and that place where you do have to be backed into the corner before you, well, not you. Okay, I'll talk about me. But,
I statements only.
Right, I statement. Because I just went through 3 years of divorce with all sorts of adjectives I could put around it.
Sure.
And I was forced into a corner where I could not stay in the marriage any longer, and neither could my ex-husband. Both of us woke up one day and went, whoa, after 28 years, whoa.
Oh boy.
Yeah. But I really felt forced into it. And having gone through the journey of all of that excavation and uncovering and healing and crying and screaming and blah, 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 I'm now out of it. And my intention through all of it was to live my life as fully as I could.
Boy, that's courageous.
And it is a hero's journey. Those of us that get pushed into the corner, we embark. We don't even, I don't know that we even realize that that's the demarcation point. We've now set off on a new journey, and we don't even know it until you get to wherever it is you're going or whatever.
Boy. And what I always encourage people to look at is, the question, of course, is how do you get your spark back if you've lost it? How do you get your mojo working again? And part of my response is always, how about identifying where you lose your life force? Maybe it's a partnership where you feel like a ghost of your full glorious self, or maybe it's a job that sucks the life out of you, or maybe it's your eager, capable, bright mind being put in some dull circumstance. And I think it's just important to begin to identify the places where passion leaks out of your life and joy leaks out, optimism, inspiration.
I love that you're saying that, Greg, because it feels to me like so many people think it's an either or proposition. Well, I must be depressed or I must be miserable. I can't have any happiness because, but they don't. Like, I didn't realize that I was so unhappy until I went through the divorce and went, holy moly, what was I living with? And I'm sure that's true for lots of people, whether, like if you exit a job, whether you want to or not, and then you look back and go, wow, what was I putting up with?
Exactly. And I think it's a good question to ask. What are you putting up with that you no longer feel willing to put up with? And at what cost have you been putting up with it? I think that's an important question because, one of the primary dynamics in this whole conversation to me is about having an inspired life is the struggle between passion and security.
Yeah.
And those two dynamics, and what people are willing to put up with for securities of one kind and another, whether it's financial security or the security of other people's approval or certain self-limiting beliefs that keep you safe, is sometimes untenable for people. And unfortunately, this is my observation, both in my own life and in other people's, is that in the contest between the two of these forces, passion and security tends to win. And passion tends to get backburnered or deep-sixed or something. But I have seen this myself. No amount of security that you're going to achieve is going to compensate you, I think, for giving up your soul, selling your soul, giving up your passions. I mean, yes, it'll probably allow you to suffer in nicer surroundings, but that's about it.
Right. So, Greg, let's talk about the passion and because again, I'm just going to talk about me. But, during the darkness of the last 3 years, I had a friend who continually checked in with me, and she kept saying, well, what makes you happy? What makes you happy? What is it? And I was like, I can't even tell you how many times I wanted to slap her. Because, when you're in those darkness places, I don't see happy. I don't see light, So how do you find that passion when you're in those places, and how do you come into it?
Oh, well, I think that's skipping over a step.
Okay.
I think people want out. They want a fix from the situation, and naturally, I get it. It's a stinker to be in that state. But I say the best advice I ever got around this stuff was suffer creatively, not just neurotically.
Oh, wait a minute. What does that mean?
Oh, it means suffering in a way that is useful, that leads to insights and changes. And in other words, don't just leap into looking for a way out of the suffering. Get into it. I mean, this is something meditators know. If you can't get around something, get into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so my suggestion is, if you're feeling despairing or depressed or sad or any of these things that people think of as the opposite of passion and inspiration, I say suffer creatively. Literally, draw it out. Draw pictures of the obstacles and the suffering. Literally make a picture of it. Write about it. Talk it out. Play it up. Do improvisation. Find ways of exploring the feeling of being stuck before you just try to jump into the, tell me how you're happy. I heard somebody say this once. You ever see the movie Dead Poets Society?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I heard somebody say this once. She said, I have a Carpe Diem mug. And truthfully, at 6 a.m, it does not make me want to seize the day. It makes me want to slap a dead poet.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's something to be said for, I don't mean wallowing, but I mean using this phase and exploring it as part of the way out. Is down and through. It's not over and around. Don't try to transcend.
Yeah, and a lot of people do that because the pain or the suffering is so exquisite. Who wants to go through that? But I agree with you. It is necessary to go into it. And that's a very kind of razor's edge, of, okay, when am I really wallowing and when am I intentionally moving through the suffering in a way that I'm going to come out better?
Right. Well, I think that's partly where the suffering creatively part comes in, because as long as you're using it, plowing it in, and exploring it, I don't believe you're in a wallowing state. Because I think wallowing is joined at the hip with a kind of a depressed feeling.
Right.
Listless or restless or frustrated. But I think that the creative piece makes it juicy, makes it like, okay, you're exploring, you're learning, you're growing, you're getting out of the proverbial box. And I think it's a different kind of a sensation than wallowing. Same thing with the question, how do you know when you're procrastinating on something and whether the information you need to make it happen just hasn't made its way to you yet, and you're in this actively waiting phase. And those are tricky discernment questions.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about you in the book. In the introduction, you delineate passion, and you say passion can be cultivated. Now, okay, let's talk about that. How does that work?
Well, I mentioned that because I just wanted to counter anybody's idea that it's one from the either you got it or you don't department. Like you said, some people are just exhilarated, exuberant types, and some people are just naturally depressive types. And it was just my way of saying, look, this is something we have a say in. We have some volition in this arena, and we can turn it off and we can turn it back on again. And it's not one switch either, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's 1,000 of them.
Uh-huh.
And this is the way I encourage people to look at this stuff is to identify lots of little switches in the course of everyday living on Main Street life. Lots of little switches where you can choose to move toward or away from your aliveness. And there's lots of opportunities to do that. And I say, start small. These are the fire drills for the bigger ones.
So what are a couple little switches that you know?
Oh, my goodness. I'll give you a perfect example. I've been working with this one just about as we speak. I have discovered a little habit of mine that I've probably had forever, and I just noticed it's really a debilitating little habit, and I just put up with it. And that is that in the transition zone between sleeping and getting up in the morning, which I get to enjoy in slow-mo because I don't get woken up by an alarm clock.
Wow, you're lucky.
What I've noticed typically gets me out of bed is a thought. And it's usually about something I got to get done today, something I should have got done yesterday and didn't, looming deadline I just remembered, an annoying sound outside, in other words, a negative motivation. So what I've been experimenting with is one of the little switches is rather than letting a negative or a worrisome thought be the first thing that goes through my mind when my feet hit the floor. And that's significant to me because I'm literally grounding myself and my day in that crappy disposition. I'm now waiting a minute or two, lying in bed, for a more affirmative thought to come along and only touching my feet to the floor on that note.
Oh, my God, that's a brilliant practice. I have chills as you're saying that. I'm going to do that.
It's been great. It's been fascinating. And so what I do is I start my day on a little upswing rather than a little downer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, the level at which I encourage people to address this stuff. The little switches, like another one would be when somebody asks you how you are, tell them how you really are. It's just a little tiny practice in authenticity rather than people-pleasing. Or be the first to make up after a quarrel, or take your jokes to open mic night. Or, you know what I mean? Just little ways of just pushing our edges just a little bit, taking little risks.
I was just going to say, all that sounds risky, Greg.
It is. But this is, the passion is in the risk, and we have to be willing to push past all the little security-oriented comfort zones and move into a state where we're what psychologists sometimes call just manageable difficulty, where we're on a growing edge. We're not just same-olding it all the time. And it makes us feel alive to push just a little bit past, not into the point when you're paralyzed, but to the point when you're energized. And so I mean, here's another one. I suggest that I do this myself with some regularity. Devote a day to finding 10 little tiny ways that you can bring novelty into your day-to-day life. Because novelty, in my opinion, is a corrective for habit and routine and trances and all that. And so I'm talking about getting up on the other side of the bed in the morning for a change, or sitting at a different side of the breakfast table in the morning. I mean, a quarter turn, the whole view changes.
Right.
You know, driving to work a slightly different route, ordering something other than your usual at the restaurant, rearranging one piece of furniture in your house, that kind of stuff.
Oh, my goodness. And now you're talking to somebody who is a routine person. I like my routine. It's very comfortable, Greg. I do go to the particular restaurant because I know that's the particular thing I want to eat. I'm serious. And it takes, this is interesting. I'm going to practice this, 10 new ways just to shift my perspective.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to suggest, by the way, by saying all this, that I'm against security. I mean, I make this duality here between passion and security, but I don't mean to suggest that I'm against security. I get why security is desirable. I'm just saying that another piece of advice I was given, that is operative advice in my life, is that heroism, or heroinism, of course, can be redefined for the modern age, he said, as the ability to tolerate paradox, to hold two seemingly contrary energies inside you and still hang on to your cookies. And the fact that security is good and so is risk.
Yeah.
And to hold the tension between them.
That's the thing I think that we're facing now in the current consciousness, if you will, of the world, is holding a paradox. Because the either or has only gotten us so far. The us versus them has only gotten us so far. The polarities, but the paradox and sitting in I remember the first time I was in my 20s when somebody explained to me what that word meant. I could not comprehend it because it was either or for me. It was black and white. I had no idea. But the paradox is really where life kind of fuels itself, I think.
Oh, and you know, I think you were alluding to this, and I think it was. It's also an incredibly powerful skill to practice because, you know, you were talking about the state of the world. I think that paradox, the willingness, the ability to stretch yourself wide enough to encompass seemingly opposing energies, whether it's us and them, or faith and fear, or passion and security. I think this skill mitigates against tyranny just by its very nature, because what tyranny does is it elevates one principle and suppresses others.
Yeah.
That's almost the working definition of it. And the willingness to hold both and bring them together to educate each other, I think works against tyranny, not just in our own psyches, but between people.
I would agree with you in that, and I agree with you in that. It does.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, you know, and it's interesting because on Living Your Inspired Life, we've been talking about, and the groups that I work with, talking about enlarging the container enough, which is what you just said, enlarging it enough so all of the possibilities can be held and explored, as opposed to just focusing on one, and now this kind of quantum physics, I guess, but as opposed to focusing on one idea, and that's the one thing I'm going to stick with, remaining as open as you can to all of it, because there's so many other ideas that can shift in the course of a moment.
Oh, then you'll appreciate this.
Okay.
You know the name Jean Houston?
Yes.
The mythologist, psychologist, author. She said something. She says a million brilliant things. It's hard to keep up with her. But she said that people who are described as larger than life are not that way because they're physically imposing or something, or heroic or charismatic, or, you know, living their lives on grand stages and such. She describes the larger than life types as people who are, and I'm quoting here, profoundly present to the stuff of their lives.
Oh, yeah.
They're cooking on more burners. They use their senses way more than most people, all 6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
They use their senses, they inhabit their bodies and their minds more, and they love novelty. And, talk about expanding the container. We look at other people as larger than life.
Right. Not
Celebrities,
us, not me.
Well, that's great.
That's
great. But larger than life means being profoundly present to the stuff of your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not running from any of it. Oh, I want to fix her. My friend is unhappy. I should just try to make her happy again.
Right. It's interesting, too, because part of the thing about being passionate and then taking the risk in that passion, for me, has opened my consciousness and my internal world to this idea that it's okay to be vulnerable. And I've actually begun to encompass or embody, or whatever the word is, the idea that the vulnerability that I experience is that place of power and connection. And that's a better place to live in than the place of safety, security, and let me know that I got all my ducks in a row.
Yeah, exactly. You've probably run across Brene Brown's work.
Yes, love her. Yeah.
Talk about changing the paradigm around vulnerability.
Yeah.
Her work is marvelous. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I share my thoughts about vulnerability and my current experience of it with people, it really is off-putting to them. They don't want to know about vulnerability. Most of us don't, like you're saying in your book, the safety and security tends to be the thing we think we want, and yet it's the thing that deadens our self-expression.
Oh my God! To me, I look at the arena, for instance, of relationships, and I am absolutely convinced of this at this point, that vulnerability brings strength into the relationship, not weakness. And I know that probably seems counterintuitive to me in many ways, especially as a guy. But I have found over and over again that the more I'm willing to reveal and to be a not-knower,
right.
The more I encourage my partner to reveal and to be in a not-knowing place together and just building trust. Trust, if nothing else. And so this notion that vulnerability is weakness or defeat is absolutely not true in that arena.
Right.
If you're talking about, your castle is being besieged by an enemy army, yes, if you leave the front door open, that kind of vulnerability is in fact going to be weakness. But I'm not talking about warfare. Even if you think of relationship as a battleground.
God.
Yeah. And it is sometimes.
It is sometimes.
Absolutely.
So I'm talking with Gregg Levoy. The book is called Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. This is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you. This is Susan Burrell, and welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm speaking with Gregg Levoy, the author of Vital Signs. And I got to tell you guys, I'm reading this book, and I'm loving it. I love the stories that you bring into the book, Gregg, and the illustrations and the research that you've done is just so phenomenal. I feel like each little chapter is just a nugget that I can look at and sit with. And I love the way you tell a story. It's just brilliant. So Vital Signs is all about finding your passion. And one of the things you say in the book, Gregg, is that passion isn't necessarily about happiness or nor is it always about a peak experience. So can we speak a little bit about that? Because I think people think that if you're passionate, then you're just on fire all the time.
Oh, yeah. Right. No, because I think, for instance, a contemplative life can be utterly passionate. You know, it's not just about kicking up your heels. It's not just about joy and exuberance and all those high-flying kind of emotions. It is that, but it isn't only that. And I think that a passionate life can be one where you feel every emotion exquisitely, even painfully.
Ow,
You
yeah,
know,
I get that.
And so I just want people to have a kind of a holistic, I guess, approach to what this phenomenon is. It's like Gene Houston said, you have you're profoundly present to everything that comes up, and you wonder about everything. See, wonder to me is one of the active ingredients in living passionately and inspired, and having a sense of wonder about all of it. It's like, I wonder why I feel so depressed. Let's dig and see if there's some thwarted desire that's under there. Let's suffer creatively, not just when you want to go out and play Frisbee with your friends and have a ball, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just think the willingness to encounter all of it, and with what the Buddhists call beginner's mind, you know, through the eyes of children who are curious about pretty much everything.
And that's certainly a skill that has to be remembered, right?
Yeah.
For those of us that have lived life for a while, it's like it's challenging sometimes to get back to that beginner mind.
Oh, and it doesn't take a very long while. I remember Carl Sagan writing about the difference between going into a kindergarten class and a high school class to talk about science. And he described, you know, the kindergartners as just, you know, open for business. And he described the high schoolers as jaded, and the sense of wonder just relegated to kid stuff. So these are teenagers.
Yeah.
And they're already like, cool is more important than having a state of wonder and awe and reverence and gratitude and all that. And I think partly it's important for kids to have at least one person in their life who helps them kind of witness the world with from a state of wonder. It's a teacher, a parent, an uncle, a sibling, a friend, just somebody who's willing to just show them how marvelous the world is. That tends to stick through life. I mean, the Vital Signs book is really kind of dedicated to my dad in many ways, because he gave me what I consider one of the greatest gifts of my life, and that is the gift of wonder. And he, ever since I was a little boy, his favorite game to play with me and my two brothers, something he invented called the alien game. So the way this worked was he was an alien from another planet, which we had suspected all along. we were his guides on Earth, and we'd go out into the neighborhood or into the city or something down by the shore, and he would ask questions about the planet that he saw, and we had to try to explain it to him. And it was an incredible teaching tool and taught me to wonder at everything. You know, it's like, why do my fingers wrinkle in the bathtub? And why am I 59 years old and don't know the answer to that question? You know, how do spiders avoid getting caught up in their own webs? And why don't I know that by now? It's just like we live with something every day of our lives and never come to understand its most essential characteristics. And that goes for living with ourselves every day.
Right. So there's another thing you talk about restoring, I guess, yourself to your passion and how to bring all of that back. And so part of it is doing this sense of wonder. But what else is it? Because I'm hearing that there's a place where we get to choose, you know? I mean, I think a lot of people don't even recognize that you can choose to live passionately.
Yes, absolutely. I think partly is I coming to a place of identifying how you really feel about your own life and what parts of your life feel like they're turned off, which ones are turned on, where you're saying yes, where you're saying no, or maybe worse, maybe.
Oh, the maybe thing, yeah.
In that infernal indecision that can, frankly, steal decades out of your life. So things like asking the question, what appears to be trying to emerge in my life right now? Where do I see some little signs and signals that indicate something is trying to happen? You know, where do I try to steer conversations, right? Or what's trying to happen in any given relationship, or even conversation? You know, there's something about just paying attention to what is trying to emerge. And sometimes this requires, of course, just sitting down and shutting up.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is a scale that seems to be going the way of the dinosaur in an internet age where companies like Motorola coin terms like micro boredom.
Micro boredom.
Micro boredom is their way of saying those little snatches of time that we find insufferable, like waiting online at the grocery store or sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office or in traffic. You know, moments of just lovely, delicious idleness, what the Sufis called sacred drift. And we were like, oh, I can't stand it. I'm going to plug in my iPod. I'm going to do digital busy work. I'm going to micro boredom. I've actually seen TV sets, little tiny television sets mounted above urinals and gas pumps.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. Oh, my goodness.
I mean, how bad is it getting that we are bored in the time it takes to go number one?
So okay, so when I was raising my son, the word boredom and I'm bored was never allowed to be spoken because there was always something that we could do together or he could do that would be thought-provoking and entertaining. And, you know, and I remember hearing other people's kids and, you know, I'm bored, Mom. I'm like, really? Why don't you go out and look at the sky or, you know, pick up a book?
Did it work?
For my son? Oh, yeah. He's an avid researcher and reader and contemplative. Yeah. Who hates school. He just dropped out.
Oh, wow. Yes.
But you know what? Because because that was the place of boredom because he wasn't being
stimulated.
Right. He wasn't the professors were not activating his curiosity anymore.
Oh boy. And you know, half the reason for that, I think the professors, the teachers themselves are bored and passionless. Mm-hmm. And there's a really direct correlation between their passion and the passion of their students or congregants or constituents or whatever.
Right.
And, I mean, this is a reason why when I headed off to college, my dad said, don't take courses, take professors.
What a brilliant suggestion. That's brilliant.
Yeah. And, you know, in terms of the boredom with the children thing, I think sometimes I've heard this from parents and sometimes authors who write to parents. They say, you know, when especially when little kids come complaining that they're bored, and there's obviously a million things they could do, including housework.
Right.
They say just pull the kid into your lap for 5 minutes and give them, you know, that good old quality time. And usually kids get some kind of refueling from just connecting with you, and then they're off on their merry way. And I've always thought that was kind of brilliant.
Yeah, I like that.
Again, it's like go with the boredom for a little while, and then they get to move through it rather than just resisting it and coming up with 10 suggestions. And they always say, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that.
So I want to read another quote from your book, Greg. And the book, again, is Vital Signs by Gregg Levoy. And this is, okay, I'm just going to read it. Action is often boredom's remedy, undoing your sense of helplessness by acting rather than being acted upon. But especially with the deeper kinds of boredom, the vaccine is more likely to be insight. If you dig a bit, you can probably identify the thwarted desire or vitality that boredom is masking, the stone that's been thrown onto your path, which will still bring you back to the need for action, but at least it will be informed action.
Right.
And so many of us go, oh, wait a minute, I can't do anything because now I'm at a stoppage or I'm bored.
Right. Yeah, you know, you've heard of restless leg syndrome?
Yeah, and you know what? Is that real? Really?
Oh, my God. 1 in 10 Americans apparently has it.
Evidently, right.
I mean, that's like 35 million people.
Okay.
And frankly, I only in the last year I had some symptoms of it, and I looked it up, and the symptoms I had were exactly what the literature about it describes. Feelings in your legs of what most people call creepy and crawly, restlessness, inability to sleep. I mean, I had it for a period of time, but I think what I came to, and this is my point about this, is restlessness needs to be picked apart. The word means rest less. All right? So the question to ask is, well, what wants to move? And in my case, that restless leg syndrome was about having spent years and years sitting at a desk behind a computer writing vital signs. And I was overdue for teaching and moving through space and getting out into the world and traveling and collecting frequent flyer miles and, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Taking the book off the shelf. And as soon as I hit the road, the symptoms stopped. So there's something about looking at where you feel restless and bored and what wants to move and where does it want to go.
I have an illustration of restless leg, if you would allow me. I had a client who had restless leg syndrome for about 3 years. And during that process, she was looking for her new relationship. Where's my new relationship? Where's my long-term love of my life? And blah, blah, blah. And after, I don't know, a few years, she met this man who's now her long-term relationship. And I asked her, I said, so what's going on with your legs now? She goes, you know what? It's funny. It stopped. So.
Right. So there was some place she wanted to be that she was other than where she was.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's a good question because a lot of people, 35 million Americans is a lot of people feeling restless. And, what are the legs? It's not restless arm syndrome. It's not restless, neck syndrome. It's the legs. The legs are about momentum.
Right. There's
some place people want to get to that they're not allowing themselves or don't feel permitted to. I think of a consultation I read about between Arnold Mindell, who started something called process-oriented psychology, and a client. He was in Dublin, Ireland. He had a consultation with a woman who said she was depressed, but she was one of those people whose feet was moving a million miles an hour. You know the way people, they vibrate?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't think you're actually depressed. I think there's a lot of energy you're sitting on. What would your legs do if they were free to do anything they wanted? And she got up. Maybe this is because it was Ireland. She did a jig.
Yay.
And during the course of doing that, she said, I feel like there's a lot of energy that I don't feel permitted to express in public.
Oh.
So there's something about the willingness to touch those stuck places in us is the beginning of moving through them. It's like, what part of you wants to get up and do a jig that doesn't feel permitted to do that?
You know what? That makes a ton of sense to me. A ton of sense. And that's part of the whole vitality thing of allowing your self-expression and allowing your body to experience that self-expression.
Oh, absolutely. I ran across so many studies that made a link between revealing and healing. Getting what's on the inside out, which I think is what self-expression is probably about.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one of the most compelling examples I have ever run across. Place called the Institute of Noetic Science.
Yes.
Oh, you've heard of it?
I have, but explain it to the listeners.
Yeah, it's noetic, I believe, refers to consciousness studies, really. And it was started by an astronaut named Edgar Mitchell out in California, in the Bay Area, to study human potential. And they have the world's largest database out there of spontaneous remission from disease.
Uh-huh.
And I went out and I did a story years ago for Omni. Remember Omni magazine?
Yes.
Popular science magazine, on that database. And so I spent some time with it. And one of the things that really jumped out at me about spontaneous remission, there's 3,500 case studies out there, world's largest collection, was that what immediately preceded many of these spontaneous remissions was a profound and affirmative personal change. So reconciling with some long-despised parent or finally marrying your longtime sweetheart, or finally unearthing some long-buried passion, things like that. Dramatic and affirmative personal change.
Wow.
And that, to me, says a lot. And I'm not saying this by way of suggesting that just by making a profound affirmative personal change, you're going to heal whatever, cancer, diabetes, whatever. But it will have a healing effect on your life at the very least. And I think that is a very compelling finding.
Well, and in your book, you say that passion is intimately related to health.
Yeah.
Which
Right.
I personally have experienced. It is.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the best examples I've ever run across. But, you talked about self-expression a moment ago. And I think just clinically speaking, the energy that it takes to hold back something that wants expression in us, whatever it is, our power, our purpose, our voice, clinically speaking, that is literally hard physical labor. And that is draining.
Oh, yeah.
And so the constant work of inhibiting yourself and your self-expression has been found to weaken immune, heart, and nervous systems.
It's interesting because there seems to be a plethora of autoimmune disorders going on right now. So there must be a correlation between what you're suppressing that you really need to express in your life and if you've got an autoimmune thing, to look into that.
Well, it's certainly worth exploring.
Mm-hmm.
Arnold Mindell said to me, I interviewed him for the Callings book too. He said, because I have a chapter in there called "The Language of the Body," because the word symptom means a sign. That's actually the etymology of the word, a sign. And the word pathology means the logic of pain. So we're talking about this, and you said symptoms. Symptoms are dreams trying to come true.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's a heck of an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to look at some recurring symptom in your body, like right now, that has your attention, and then give it a voice and sort of ask it to fill in the blank. Now, this would be the symptom speaking to you, saying, my dream, Susan, is that you would blank.
Right.
I think people might come up with some fascinating insights to whatever degree this is true, that symptoms are dreams trying to come true. And I've asked the question in workshops before, and there's some amazing things that people come up with around that.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me, and it speaks to what the quote I read a little earlier from your book, that, if you ask the question, then you have an informed action piece that can come out of it.
Exactly. And again, we're brought back around to the work of looking in, and this is risk.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about risk earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I literally know people who chase after tornadoes for a living, wrestle alligators, jump over rows of school buses on a motorcycle.
Oh my gosh!
But who wouldn't be caught dead in a therapist's office or a 10-day meditation retreat, or doing inner work, which they tend to call navel gazing, and I tend to call mental health.
Right.
But so it's really an act of courage to do the looking within. This is not easy stuff.
No, it's not. I was actually talking to a friend last night who's begun that inner process, and she called me and she said, Susan, I'm doing the woo-woo work. I said, what does that mean? She goes, well, I'm seeing a therapist. I was like, really? Because not so woo to me, but
Exactly.
But for some people it is, and I get that it is, because it can we create all these assumptions of what we're going to find when we go within. And I mean, I know years ago when I started my questing, there was places where I was afraid I was going to go within and find something horrible about myself that I could never, ever tell anybody. Which really, it's just like I got to look and go, oh, yeah, that. And that goes back to the holding the paradox, right? So I got this light side, I got this shadow side, and I'm just going to hold all of it now.
Exactly. So many people talk about, wholeness, holistic lifestyles, holistic health, holistic relationships and business practices. But it seems to me that people are often forgetting that wholeness requires that you take into account the whole of the thing, including the parts you don't really feel like looking at, no less admitting to.
Right.
But you can't create wholeness and simultaneously cut out part of the being that's being called,
I agree with you. And that, as soon as you said that, then I went back to the way medicine has evolved and and thank God now we're having this holistic, naturopathic approach that people can utilize now, whereas before it was like, well, you got a symptom, let's cut it out. Let's just eradicate it. Really?
Exactly.
As opposed to finding what, like you said earlier, what's the dream that wants to come through me because of this symptomology I'm experiencing.
Exactly. I mean, even restless leg syndrome, there's medications you can take.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they do what a lot of medications do. They treat the symptom, but they don't treat the source. I think that's partly our work to do.
To treat the source?
The source of whatever the symptom is. To whatever degree there's a link, even in your own mind, between a symptom, like restless leg syndrome, and something that you're neglecting or a place where you're stagnating. It's not something a doctor is going to do. She's going to give you a pill, right, for restless legs.
Right.
And but it's our work to do the digging and find out why do I feel restless? I think there's a clue in the fact that the medical literature says that literally getting up when you're feeling restless leg syndrome, getting up and walking around your house usually takes care of the symptoms instantly. So what that suggests is that movement is part of the antidote.
Right.
And I'm just saying expand that exploration.
Right. For anything, any kind of symptomology.
I think so. Again, even if it doesn't cure your symptoms, there can be a profound healing that happens just by looking at some of the underlying issues.
So, Gregg, we have just a few more minutes, but there's another chapter in your book that caught my attention, and you call it "A Spark Needs a Gap." Love and passion. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. That's the chapter where I'm looking at passion in the context of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Each chapter is sort of looking at a different arena, and that one I'm looking at the fate of passion in the course of our intimate relationships. And, of course, this is one of the great conundrums for couples is how do you keep that proverbial spark alive? I think it's in the nature of passion to fade. I mean, it's in the nature of nature. Everything fades. Everything's got its seasons.
Right.
But I think what I was exploring there was what is passion in the context of relationship? It's the hunger for engagement. It's the hunger to be seen and known. It's the hunger to relate to people. And there are lots of ways that you can engender that. This is not just like a booster rocket in the space program. It launches you into outer space, but once the orbit's reached, it falls away, and that's that.
Right.
And it's one of the points I make in many of the chapters is that passion isn't just something that sparks up and then dies down. It's endurance. Passion is also endurance. And
as you're saying that, I'm seeing like a smoldering coal that just can ignite and then smolder again.
Well, and it does do that in a lot of relationships. There's the idea that we're going to always have passion. You were talking earlier about the either or.
Right.
We either have this or that. That's, I think, a belief a lot of people bring to relationships, that either you're going to have passion or you're going to have serenity, but not both. Either freedom or commitment, not really both. So in our minds, it's either like Wuthering Heights or The Remains of the Day. And it's not. It's not an either or equation in my mind. It's a both and we need both. And of course it takes work. That's the thing about relationship. It's like people think that once they find their soulmate, everything's gonna be hunky dory. But relationships take work and diligence and vigilance, and
right.
So does the passion in that relationship.
Right. Whether it's a relationship to self or relationship to another human being.
Yeah,
It takes
Exactly.
work. Yeah.
Exactly.
Gregg, do you have a website that we can give to everybody?
Sure, yeah. It's the easiest way to get a hold of me these days. It's really world headquarters. It's GreggLevoy.com, GreggLevoy.com.
.com. And the book is called Vital Signs, The Nature and Nurture of Passion. And I have one more quote from your book, Gregg, that I want to read. Vital Signs is geared to being in love with life. I love that, Gregg. Vital Signs is geared to being in love with life, not just attaining a passion, but cultivating the skill of passion. Not just passion as a place you get to, but a place you come from. And Gregg, I just thank you so much. I want to have you back on so we can continue this dance and conversation, because there's so much in this book that I invite everybody to go out and get a copy. It's a keeper. It's a keeper. So thank you for joining us on Living Your Inspired Life. And I'm just going to end with, and so it is, namaste.